If you're a business with a strong connection to history, education, travel, or place based storytelling, and you're looking to reach an audience that values those things, we should talk. You can reach me at john.summers@summersmediaenterprises.com. Now, let's get back to our story. Welcome to the Tennessee History Nerd. This is a podcast dedicated to Tennessee's past. Every week we bring you a new story about the people, places, and events that have shaped Tennessee and made it, and us, who and what we are. So grab your favorite beverage, find a comfortable place, and sit back and enjoy. Tennessee is a big state. Not Texas, California, or Alaska big, but to drive from Johnson City to Memphis, that's about a 500-mile drive. So when we're talking about comprehensively covering the stories of the state, it's a big task. It helps to take it in bite-sized chunks, and one way is a county at a time. So, as promised when we began the podcast, we're going to do that. We're going to drive across the state one county at a time. And frankly, the easiest and probably most ecumenical way to do that is to take the counties alphabetically. And thus, in this county spotlight number 5, we're driving across Blount County and looking at its story this week. So make sure you got your sunglasses on, your drink in the cup holder, and your seatbelt fastened. We're on the road, and we're headed into Blount County, Tennessee. One of the long-standing jokes among some folks in Knoxville is that if you need proof of eternal life, you need look no further than the construction projects on Alcoa Highway. It really does seem like all that's been going on forever, and that's kind of a big deal because the commercial airport that serves Knoxville and Knox County is the McGhee Tyson Airport. It's just outside of Alcoa in Blount County, and the most direct route to it from Knoxville is Alcoa Highway, right through all that construction. As an aside, before we go much further, I think it's a good idea to know that while the spelling of the county makes it appear that it should be pronounced Blount, rhyming with count, it's actually correctly pronounced Blunt, as in not sharp, but blunt. It might be of interest to note that the original McGhee Tyson Airport actually was in Knoxville on Sutherland Avenue, roughly where the West High School is today. The land for the original airport was donated to Knoxville in the 1920s by the family of Lieutenant J.G. Charles McGhee Tyson, provided that they named the airport in his honor. He was a naval aviator who was killed in action in World War I. The city then leased the current site just north of Alcoa in Blount County in 1936 and opened 2 runways there. The U.S. Army bought the airport from the city in 1942. After the war, the Army sold the airport back to the city, and by then the Army had built a control tower and a 4,500-foot runway. In 1951, the United States Air Force came to McGhee Tyson because by that point there was concern with defending both Alcoa's aluminum production and nearby Oak Ridge from potential Cold War threats, and so McGhee Tyson became a Cold War Air Force fighter base. Over the years, there have been different units and aircraft there, including an aerial refueling unit, and it's been an Air National Guard base for the last several years after having been an Air Force base for over a decade during the Cold War. But it has also been a joint civilian airport for pretty much that entire time as well, serving the greater Knoxville area from across the county line in Blount County. You're barely past the airport when you can see the gateway to the modern limits of Alcoa across the highway ahead of you. Now, to be completely clear, modern Alcoa is much larger than the original company town built for the Aluminum Company of America, Alcoa. its corporate facility. And interestingly, it's actually at least the second town in Tennessee to be called Alcoa. The first town with the name is now a ghost town, but it was renamed Calderwood. Located almost due south of Maryville, it was founded in 1912 and built for workers who were involved in the building of the Calderwood Dam on the Little Tennessee River, and who operated and maintained the dam, which was completed in 1930. The later name of the town was for the Alcoa engineer responsible for the building of the Calderwood Dam, along with two other dams in the area, James Calder. These dams were meant to provide hydroelectric power to the aluminum production plants being developed by the company in the area of North Maryville, what is today known as Alcoa. By the way, if you're one of those who loves dragging his foot pegs on a motorcycle while weaving along a curvy mountain road, Calderwood is known as the ghost town on the Tail of the Dragon, that stretch of impossibly winding mountain road in the Smokies. In 1913, the Alcoa Corporation, now known as Arconic, began building the South Plant in the area. The construction of the town began in 1917, and then construction began on the West Plant in 1919. When rumors began circulating in the winter of 1918 and 1919 that the city of Maryville was planning to have a bill introduced in the Tennessee General Assembly to enable the city to annex all the Alcoa and Babcock Lumber Company holdings, the company leadership acted preemptively to create an incorporated municipality that would enable them to ensure that any taxes assessed in the new town would stay in the new town for the benefit of its own residents, rather than being used to pay to create the utilities and the infrastructure improvements that Maryville lacked at the time. And at that time, the company gave the town its own name. And so, in a private act by the Tennessee General Assembly, the city of Alcoa was chartered on July 1st, 1919. If your idea of a good weekend includes a fishing rod, a boat, a campsite, and a Tennessee sunset over the water, then you need to check out Birdsong Resort, Marina, and Campground. Located on scenic Kentucky Lake on the beautiful Tennessee River, just 9 miles off Interstate 40 at exit 133, Birdsong is conveniently located halfway between Memphis and Nashville. Family-owned and welcoming guests since 1961, Birdsong is now operated by the second generation of the Keast family, and whether you're looking for cabins, full-service RV sites, primitive tent camping, boat rentals, boat sales, fuel, bait, or easy lake access, Birdsong has you covered. Be sure to visit the Tennessee River Freshwater Pearl Museum, where you'll find Tennessee's official state gem, the freshwater pearl, and learn how the freshwater pearl industry brought worldwide attention to this part of Tennessee. To start planning your getaway, visit birdsong.com or call 731-584-7880. That's birdsong.com or call 731-584-7880. Birdsong Resort, Marina, and Campground. I think you'll be glad you went. And when you call, tell them Big John sent you. The City of Alcoa website claims that the city was the first planned community in the state of Tennessee. Certainly it was the first company town planned this way in the state. The original plan for the town had it laid out in 4 sections: Springbrook, Bassell, Hall, and Vose. 700 company homes were built through this program, as well as including utilities such as electricity, water, and sewer services. Today, some of the old Alcoa company buildings do still exist. For example, the old Vose School, built in 1916 by Babcock Lumber, still stands. It was at one time among the most modern of school buildings, with indoor plumbing and electricity and indoor heating. But it was abandoned for several years after it ceased to be used by the city. It's now been restored and repurposed, and today it houses 4 apartments. The old Springbrook School, later the Alcoa High School as the city's school system evolved, then served as an elementary school for Alcoa for almost 30 years before it was destroyed by fire. It burned in 1968, but the gymnasium still stands and flanks the beautiful Springbrook Park. Today, a winding paved path meanders through this green space in the middle of the city where walkers and joggers exercise. But this was once the center of the Springbrook section of the company town. While it's technically not the oldest community in Blount County, the county seat of Maryville is the oldest incorporated Blount County town. Formed in 1795, it takes its name from Mary Blount, the wife of Territorial Governor William Blount. Incidentally, the county is itself named for him. So the county was named for the governor, and the county seat was named for his wife. And William Blount also presided over the first constitutional convention for the state of Tennessee and later served as one of the original 2 U.S. senators from Tennessee after it became a state. The courthouse in Maryville is massive, and in many county seats across the state, you'll have a square. The courthouse is in the center of it, and downtown is built around it. I can rattle off half a dozen such towns in my mind without even trying hard, and I bet I could name a dozen like it if I really think about it. Maryville isn't really laid out like that now, though historical documents suggest that it was once laid out in a similar fashion. And this is interesting. It looks like from county historical documents that the courthouse used to be located on the corner of Main, which is now Broadway, and Cusick. Evidently, back in the day, there were gallows for hangings and stocks and pillories for discipline at the courthouse on what was then the square where the courthouse was located. Now, the courthouse is on top of a hill across Pistol Creek from downtown, and roads wind around it. At the bottom of the hill below the courthouse to the south, Lamar Alexander Parkway passes by. Court Street runs almost north and south to the east, which is the front of the courthouse. Court Circle winds along the side to the north and then bends around to the west to connect behind the courthouse with Lamar Alexander Parkway. To the north, running from the northeast to the southwest, Pistol Creek and the greenway that runs along it passes by the other side of Court Circle. The bulk of downtown Maryville is actually on top of the hill on the opposite side of Pistol Creek and the greenway from the courthouse. Not exactly sure why the town was laid out this way, although the location and orientation of Pistol Creek may have had something to do with it. And it's possible that this came about as the town grew and the courthouse was moved from its original location across Pistol Creek downtown after that structure burned in 1906. But the courthouse is also a very large structure, and it and what appear to be later additions to it create a sprawling structure that makes it even more massive. And while I'm accustomed to seeing homage paid to veterans at county courthouses, Blount's is among the more comprehensive I've seen in its recognition of the county's sons who have served in every single war that the United States has fought, including recognizing those who lived in Blount County who fought in the nation's war for independence. One particular son of Blount County that is well remembered in this regard is Sam Houston, a historical marker placed on the side of the building at the intersection of Cusick and Broadway, denoting the place of his enlistment in 1813 as one of the many Tennessee volunteers who stepped forward during the War of 1812. This was the site of the original courthouse. Just a few miles away from Maryville is the schoolhouse where Houston had been teaching in the previous year. He'd accumulated a considerable debt at a local store and worked as a teacher to pay back the debt. The schoolhouse has been preserved as a state historical landmark. Another educational institution that is integral to the identity of Maryville is Maryville College. Founded in 1819 by Presbyterian minister Isaac Anderson, Maryville College is the 12th oldest college in the South and one of the oldest institutions of higher learning west of the Appalachian Mountains. Its original purpose was to educate ministers and teachers for service on what was then still considered the American frontier, though its curriculum went on to expand into the liberal arts. During the Civil War, the campus was occupied at different times by both Union and Confederate forces, and one of its buildings was destroyed by fire. Today, the college remains one of Maryville's defining institutions. Its beautiful campus, historic buildings, and academic tradition have helped shape the character of the town for more than 2 centuries, making it one of Blount County's most enduring legacies. Maryville sprawls about significantly. There is almost no real distinction between Alcoa and Maryville, but given that Alcoa began as North Maryville, that's probably not surprising. But in spite of the extent of Maryville, it retains a lot of its small town feel. No significant high-rise buildings like you would expect in a large town, for example. If you enjoy the stories we tell each week and would like to show your support, I'd like to invite you to check out the Summers Media Enterprises merchandise store. You'll find shirts, hats, mugs, stickers, and other items featuring both the Tennessee History Nerd and Dauphin Island Diaries. This month's featured item is one of my personal favorites, our I Break for Historical Markers bumper stickers. Whether you're the kind of person who can't drive past a historical marker without pulling over, or you simply appreciate a good piece of history, it's a fun way to let everyone know you're always on the lookout for the next great story. To browse the entire collection, just visit the link in the show notes or visit the Summers Media Enterprises website. Every purchase helps to support the work that goes into researching, producing, and sharing these stories each week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting our podcasts. And now let's get back into the story. And that sprawl is exactly why the next town we'll discuss was incorporated. Located just slightly northeast across the little river from Alcoa and just north of Maryville, the tiny town of Rockford was incorporated in 1970. It's my understanding that this incorporation was essentially a defensive measure to prevent its being annexed by either Alcoa or Maryville. And if you look at a map at its location, you can easily understand why this was considered a necessity. Directly across the river to the southwest is Alcoa, and the terminus of the Pellissippi Parkway is only 2 miles south down Old Knoxville Highway from Rockford. Nestled in a crook in the Little River along Old Knoxville Highway, Rockford was named for the place on the river where there was a rocky bottom where the river could be forded. At first, Rocky Ford, and then later shortened to Rockford. Today, if you turn onto Little River Road from the Old Knoxville Highway, you can find the town hall, a small building literally on the bank of the river, and beside one small park and across the street from another. It's easy to understand why the town didn't want to be annexed. That same river, the Little River, flows through the midst of another Blount County town as well. This one to the southeast at the base of the Smokies, in a place that was originally known by the Cherokees as Tuckaleechee, and it was called Tuckaleechee Cove by the locals as the 20th century dawned. Tuckaleechee is said to mean peaceful valley in the Cherokee language. Based on the descriptions provided by novelist Louis L'Amour, it appears that Tuckaleechee Cove in his novel Ride the River is based on Tuckaleechee Cove in Blount County, although L'Amour never explicitly says this. In 1900, a Pennsylvanian by the name of W.B. Townsend arrived in Tuckaleechee Cove and started a lumber company with the purpose of providing tan bark to the tanner in the nearby community of Walland. Townsend had previously operated a similar operation in Kentucky in the 1800s and was given there the honorific title of colonel, though he was never in the military. The company he led created a small village or company town for its headquarters with a lumber mill to process the logs harvested, and it purchased nearly 80,000 acres of land in the area. That's 125 square miles of land. for the purpose of logging. That small village was called Townsend in honor of Colonel Townsend. To log on that scale required transportation, and in 1900 there was no such thing as log trucks as we know them. And the road infrastructure didn't exist in the area for that if they had. So the group of Pennsylvania investors led by Townsend created the Little River Railroad Company to create that infrastructure that was necessary to log the area. Some of the roads in the area today are actually old railroad beds. One such example is the Little River Road that runs from Townsend to the Sugar Lands Visitor Center in Gatlinburg. By the 1930s, most of the land that had been purchased by the lumber operation and logged was sold to the state of Tennessee. This was the genesis for what would become the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And when Cades Cove was added to this through the state and federal government's use of eminent domain, a move that still remains controversial almost a century later, hundreds of residents were forced from their land to create what has become one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world, according to the City of Townsend's website. And because Townsend is located at the base of the mountain below Cades Cove, it has become the gateway to Cades Cove, itself still technically part of Blount County, even though it's completely managed by the federal government through the National Park Service. The story of Cades Cove will be covered in more detail in a future episode. Today, Townsend leans into its location as the gateway to Cades Cove and as the peaceful side of the Smokies, playing off of the Cherokee meaning of Tuckaleechee and contrasting itself with the congestion and sprawl of Sevierville, Pigeon Forge, and Gatlinburg on the other side of the ridge. Cyclists pedal bicycles up and down the bike paths on each side of the main highway. And in the summer, tourists take advantage of the tubing operations that ply the cool little river that runs through the middle of town. Nearby Tuckaleechee Caverns provide another escape from the summer heat, underground. And the Little River Railroad and Lumber Company Museum, which offers free admission, tells the history of the town. And the Visitor Center and Heritage Center also are available for visitors to learn more about the area. Just inside Tuckaleechee Cove, a side road leads to another location that once served as a local tourist destination, even before there was a national park in the area. Kensale Springs was one of the multiple mineral springs attractions that drew visitors to Blount County in the years before there was a Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It was popular from about the beginning of World War I until close to the end of World War II, and basically served as a bridge from the Springs era in Blount County into the era of national park tourism. On the same side of the county was where the old Montvale Resort was located, and it was a popular destination for about 100 years, starting in the 1830s until the Seven Gables Hotel burned in the 1930s. But during its heyday, it was known as the Saratoga of the South. This was the granddaddy of the resort hotels in Blount County. A contemporary of Montvale was Allegheny Springs. This was located at the base of Chilhowie Mountain. It, too, was a popular springs resort throughout much of the 1800s, although perhaps lesser known than Montvale. And in the 1870s, Mount Nebo Springs was developed in Miller Cove. The construction of rail lines from Knoxville to Maryville enhanced the ability of travelers to access locations that would have been previously too remote to be feasible for most visitors. Resort hotels were built near Mineral Springs all throughout the state of Tennessee, and indeed throughout the South. Blount County was well positioned on the western flank of the Appalachians to have multiple resorts during that time that such operations were in vogue. Heading back westward across the county, northwest from Maryville, on the banks of the Tennessee is what is likely the oldest community in Blount County, at least the oldest settlement of European descendants, Louisville. Settlements in the area of Louisville are linked to old frontier forts and stations like Bartlett's Station, Henry's Station, and Gillespie's Fort. That said, Louisville wasn't incorporated until the middle of the 19th century in 1851. Located right on the Tennessee River, Louisville was an important river port throughout the 19th century. Then, in 1943, much of the historic town was covered by Fort Loudon Lake when the Tennessee River was impounded by the Fort Loudon Dam. Some figures I've seen suggest that as much as 70% of the old town was covered by the lake, but I've seen nothing that supports that claim or tells what was lost to the rising water. In 1974, its downtown area that remained, today which can be found right outside the town's Point Park, was designated a National Historic District. And that's where the public historic preservation of the area seems basically to have ended. Honestly, given the history of this place, I was baffled when I visited. There are clearly historic structures in the area, but the town doesn't really seem to embrace its history. The old store right outside the gate to Point Park sits vacant. No historic signage or interpretive panels tell of any of the history of the town or the area. Some of the old houses are hidden by overgrown vegetation or are in a state of advanced disrepair. Even the town's website, very helpful and useful for its residents for day-to-day functions, lacks any kind of sections telling the history of the town. For someone like me, that's really surprising and a bit disappointing, even saddening, because it feels like maybe when the lake covered the lower parts of the town, it covered the memories of the town's history along with it. I'd love to know more. I know that there's more than the town is telling folks, and I fear some of the old structures may eventually be completely lost if no preventative action is taken. If you enjoy the way we tell stories here on the Tennessee History Nerd, there's another show you might want to check out, Dauphin Island Diaries. Same approach, different setting. Stories from the Gulf Coast, rooted in place and built from the sources up. You can find it wherever you're listening right now. And now, back to our story. Southwest of Louisville is the last of the 6 incorporated towns of Blount County, Friendsville. I find Friendsville's story to be fascinating and unique, especially from a Tennessee perspective. Tennessee certainly has a rich history from a religious perspective. Various branches of the Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, Episcopalians, the Churches of Christ, and others are all a part of what gives Tennessee a prominent place in the Bible Belt. But when I think of the Society of Friends, of the Quakers, I normally associate that with places like Pennsylvania, which of course was founded as a haven for the Quakers. But Friendsville was founded by the Quakers, and indeed that's where it gets its name, from the Society of Friends organization. They first settled the area in about the time that Tennessee was moving in the direction of becoming a state in the 1790s. When I visited Friendsville recently, I had the opportunity to speak with Stephen Steele, a member of the Society of Friends organization there, and we talked right in front of the Friends Meeting House. Their building was constructed in 1808 and has been in constant use since that time. In 1951, an annex was built on the back of their building, and the entire structure was bricked in at that time. And this particular group was especially important in the 1800s. The Society of Friends was known for being abolitionist in their leanings, as they believed that the institution of slavery was inconsistent with Christianity. Friendsville became a stop on the Underground Railroad as the Quakers assisted runaway slaves escaping to the north. One of the local men most associated with that work was William J. Hackney. He and the other Quakers used a nearby cave to shelter the runaway slaves, and it later also was used to shelter Unionists who were escaping from Confederate forces in the area during the Civil War. The cave was able to comfortably shelter up to about 50 people, and it had a nearby spring that provided water. Local members of the Society of Friends congregation contributed to providing food and other assistance to those being sheltered. Later, Hackney was a guest in Knoxville of Union General Ambrose Burnside. While he was there, he described the cave and its function to novelist John Townsend Trowbridge, who used the account as the basis for the novel Cujo's Cave. Subsequently, the cave came to be called Cujo's Cave. Just for the record, the cave is still there today, but it is gated, and the locals are very closed-mouthed about its location. This is to protect the cave and to protect visitors. There have had to be multiple rescue operations at the cave over the years. In the first half of the 19th century, Friendsville was frequented by noted Quaker William Forster. Forster was born in 1784 in England and became a respected Quaker minister, what the society usually calls an elder. Forster was a staunch abolitionist and traveled quite extensively on behalf of the society, and this included several trips in North America to speak and encourage the Quakers throughout the country. According to Stephen Still, Forster evidently enjoyed greatly visiting with a group of Quakers in Friendsville, Tennessee. In 1854, while on one of these journeys, Forster became ill and passed away in Friendsville. He's buried there in the Friendsville Friends Meeting Cemetery. His grave is distinguishable from others of the period in the cemetery only because there's a wrought iron fence around his grave, the only one there. But his presence in Friendsville, given their work on the Underground Railroad, is significant. It reinforces the idea that Friendsville was important to the Quaker cause, given that one of its leading international figures visited it during one of the defining moral struggles of the 19th century. And when he died, he was buried there. Of course, there are a lot of other communities, and there's a lot more history to be discovered in Blount County. But these towns I've noted, Alcoa, Maryville, Rockford, Townsend, Louisville, and Friendsville, are the incorporated towns in the county, and that's where I focused my efforts as I drove across it. And many of these places in East Tennessee that border on the mountains have a rich history that predates the foundation of the state by decades. It's just a matter of being able to find it. So that's going to do it for this week's episode, Driving Across Blount County. I hope you've enjoyed this county spotlight. Next week, we're going to go back to July 1925 in Dayton, Tennessee, when for a little over a week, this small East Tennessee town became ground zero for what was billed as the trial of the century, when we look at the Scopes trial in Hot Summer of Evolution. I hope you'll join us then. Until then, I'm Big John Summers, the Tennessee history nerd, and I am history. As always, I wanted to take a few moments before we close out completely to thank the resources and folks from which I gathered the information for today's episode. Special thanks to Jacqueline Bell, director of the Sam Houston Schoolhouse Historic Site, for sharing information on Sam Houston's early years in Blount County, and to Stephen Steele of the Friends Meeting House in Friendsville for his insights into the community's Quaker heritage and Underground Railroad history. Research for this episode also included extensive fieldwork throughout Blount County, including review of numerous Tennessee Historical Commission historical markers and local historic site interpretive panels. Additional information was drawn from the official websites of Blount County and the cities of Alcoa, Maryville, Louisville, and Townsend, the Tennessee Encyclopedia, particularly its articles on Blount County, Maryville College, and historic Mineral Springs resorts, the National Park Service's Historic Research Study of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Volume 1, the Little River Railroad and Lumber Company Museum in Townsend, Tennessee, a September 19th, 2025 WBIR feature on the restoration of Vose School, and the 134th Air Refueling Wing History of McGhee Tyson Air National Guard Base. As always, I drew from a wide variety of resources to obtain the information I used in this episode, and I'm thankful to all those whose knowledge and effort in documentation makes it possible to do what I do. And thank you so much for listening. Hey, this is Big John Summers, and I want to thank you so much for listening to the Tennessee History Nerd. By the way, if you enjoyed this episode, I want you to know that there's a lot more content waiting for you out there. We're adding new episodes every week, and we're working our way across the whole state of Tennessee, covering stories from prehistory all the way into the 20th century. So if you like Tennessee history, there's already a catalog of stories out there for you to explore. So, scroll back through those previous episodes. You might just find something you weren't expecting. And again, thanks so much for listening.